Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whichever applies to you based on where you are. And thank you for joining us, and welcome to the first EAPD-IVI 2022 Symposium, convened with the theme Facing Forward, Securing a Healthy Africa with Vaccine Manufacturing. My name is Dr. Birkinet Adesa. I'm a senior research scientist at the International Vaccine Institute. I will be moderating the first half of this symposium, and the second half will be moderated by Dr. Yang Miji, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute Pasteur Korea. In today's symposium, we have lined up an exciting panel of speakers in cross-cutting topics focusing on vaccine development and manufacturing in Africa. And without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Jerome Kim, who is the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, to provide us with a welcoming address.
Your Excellency Mohammed Khalil, Secretary General, Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development, Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Your Excellency Igam Ho, Deputy Minister of Health and Welfare of the Republic of Korea. Excellencies and distinguished guests. It is my honor to welcome you all to the EAPD-IVI Vaccine Symposium. Thank you all for joining us here today, and a big thank you to the Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development for their support in co-hosting and organizing these valuable discussions. Today's symposium, entitled Facing Forward, Securing a Healthy Africa with Vaccine Manufacturing, brings together a diverse group of global health experts to address the technological, regulatory, and market challenges associated with establishing sustainable vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Before we begin, I would like to briefly touch on why we need vaccine manufacturing in Africa. As of May 2022, approximately 66% of the world's population has received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine, but according to Africa CDC, only 20% of the population in Africa has received at least one dose. On top of the supply bottlenecks of available COVID-19 vaccines to Africa, the constraints of national regulatory authorities delayed vaccine authorization in some countries. The lack of epidemiological data made it difficult to know where vaccines should be delivered first, and infrastructure limitations delayed or prevented last-mile deliveries. These barriers to COVID-19 vaccine access are a threat to the future of pandemic preparedness, along with the consistent disinterest of major pharmaceutical companies in developing vaccines against epidemic infectious diseases plaguing Africa. This has made it clear that Africa must reduce its dependency on wealthy countries for vaccines. Juxtaposed with the growing economies and technological capacities in Africa, the necessity and possibility of establishing vaccine manufacturing in Africa are clearer than ever. The international community is also beginning to recognize the promise of African vaccine manufacturing. In 2021, the World Health Assembly passed a resolution calling for the technology transfer and local production of vaccines in low and middle income countries. In 2022, the WHO announced the transfer of mRNA vaccine technology to Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. In Africa, the African Union and Africa CDC have launched the Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing framework to expand African vaccine manufacturing capacity over the next 10 to 20 years. For 25 years, IVI has been working closely with African researchers and health professionals to develop their capacities in disease surveillance, clinical trial management, and immunization campaigns. Today, our development partners in Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, and Madagascar, to name a few, are proving the viability of South-South and triangular cooperation as a method for vaccine development by hosting and leading the clinical trials for a number of important vaccines, including typhoid and schistosomiasis. Furthermore, IVI will be working with our partners in the Republic of Korea and the WHO to lead the 2022 Global Biointensive Training Courses at Korea's Biomanufacturing Training Hub, where we will provide 450 trainees with comprehensive know-how and skills in the development and production of biopharmaceuticals. These activities, along with the symposium, underscore IVI's commitment to freeing the world from the suffering of vaccine-preventable infectious diseases by discovering, developing, and delivering safe, effective, and affordable vaccines for global public health. I hope you all find today's symposium informative and engaging, and that today's proceeding will serve as a launching point for further collaborative efforts that will make African vaccine manufacturing a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. We'll next have welcoming remarks from His Excellency Mohammed Kahil, Secretary General, Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development, Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Your Excellency, please.
It is a great opportunity for the different parties concerned with the boosting of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. This remarkable event comes at a time of rising international fears from falling behind in the pursuit of good health and well-being, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. EAPD is a key organ of the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, founded in 2014. It serves as the first Egyptian institution mandated primarily with promotion of South-South cooperation, aiming at putting the country's comparative advantages and technical expertise into effect for the benefit of the South-South cooperation, in particular in Africa. The EAPD works relentlessly on providing medicines and various vaccines to our brothers and sisters in the African continent. To help improve the public health, we offer as well capacity building programs and workshops in the health sector, envoy medical experts and convoys to areas of shortage. Moreover, EAPD has a wide network of medical centers, clinics, and Egyptian departments within the various health institutions in Africa. This goes hand in hand with providing humanitarian relief aid of need. All these efforts come under the umbrella of our health diplomacy agenda. Our vision prioritizes human-centered approaches necessary to build African capacities and to empower local communities in Africa to best utilize their resources. We engage with our development partners in such pursuits, taking into consideration the sustainability of our projects. We also recognize the importance of involving multiple stakeholders in achieving SDGs through South-South and triangular cooperation. True to the essence and principles of South-South cooperation, the EAPD adopts a demand-driven approach by responding to the priority needs of the countries of the South, especially of Africa. We seek to ensure that the technical cooperation and the activities we provide and the partnerships that we build. True to the essence and principles of South-South cooperation, the EAPD adopts a demand-driven approach by responding to the priority needs of the countries of the South, especially in Africa. We seek to ensure that the technical cooperation and activities we provide and the partnerships that we build contribute to the continent's efforts to achieve sustainable development and realize the goals of the SDGs and Africa's Agenda 2063. We hereby consolidate our unshakable commitment of promoting South-South and triangular cooperation in a way that helps changes the realities of our communities and address those in fragile contexts. Hence, I would like to conclude with welcoming any efforts to collaborate and work with the EAPD towards the realization of our common goals and interests. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have congratulatory remarks from Dr. Lee Kang-ho, who is the Deputy Minister of Health and Welfare of the Republic of Korea and Chief of Global Vaccine Hub Office. Dr. Kang-ho, please.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I would like to congratulate the EAPD and the IVI on holding this vaccine symposium. This symposium is a meaningful academic event to enhance Africa's vaccine manufacturing capacity. Thank you, Secretary General Mohamed Khalil and Director General Jerome Kim for organizing today's event, and thank you to all participants and experts who are here with us to share your experience and knowledge. We have not seen the end of the COVID-19 pandemic ever since the WHO declared it in March 2020. Bringing an end to a pandemic requires all nations to have sufficient vaccines and therapeutics. Therefore, like the IVI's mission, affordable, safe, and effective vaccines must be provided to LMICs. The best way to do so is for the LMICs to produce vaccines themselves and lower the barriers to accessing vaccines. Korea was nominated as the WHO's Global Biomanufacturing Workforce Training Hub in February 2022. Korea is committed to ensuring that all countries around the globe become capable of manufacturing vaccines on their own in their local areas. Starting in January this year, Korea will invite 370 professionals from Africa, Asia, and South America for training on vaccine and biologics development. We plan to expand the training program to accommodate more trainees in the future. The Korean government is also planning to establish the Global Bio Campus by 2026. It will be a dedicated facility for the training hub. The ongoing battle against COVID-19 reminds us that cooperation and solidarity are the only way to end the global health crisis. There is an African proverb that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There is nothing more the Korean government wants than overcoming the current pandemic through solidarity with the nations around the world. We are happy to be part of this global effort that goes beyond COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kang Ho, for the congratulatory remarks. And with this, we now move on to the first session of the symposium, session 1. Our first presenter, Dr. Nikase Nedembi, could not, will have to present a little bit later because of unforeseen challenges. So our first presentation will be, or session 1, will be the process and challenges of the vaccine research and development, manufacturing and licensure. And we have 4 presenters in this session. Each presenter will have 10 minutes. And the first presentation will be by Dr. Ravi Ganapathy, who is the director of CMC and Research and Development at Hillman Laboratories, Singapore. And he will be presenting on an important topic of vaccine research and development entitled Processes of Vaccine Technical Transfer. Ravi, over to you, please. Ravi, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, good morning and greetings to all. Can you hear me well now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So it's a short presentation, but big topic. So I just want to quickly go through the slides. And I think probably the PDF version of the slides may be shared to the people later. And some of the things I will not explain in detail. I'll just touch upon a few things which are in the slides and people can go through that later. So it's generally on a technology transfer process in a vaccine industry, and this is common for many technologies, many transfers. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of this. So this is going to be the contents of my slides. As many people would know that Geoffrey Nicholson, who was father of post-it, has made this statement: once research transforms money into knowledge, technology transfer transforms knowledge into money. So this is an important aspect, especially after the current COVID pandemic, as people have experienced. Technology transfer is a formalized process for moving the manufacture of a drug from one facility to one scale or one drug life cycle phase to another. As per ICHQ 10, the goal of technology transfer activities is to transfer product and process knowledge between a development and manufacturing and within or between manufacturing sites to achieve product realization. This knowledge forms the basis for manufacturing process, control strategy, process validation approach, and ongoing continual improvement. Transfer of necessary information and support to necessarily manufacture and evaluate the transferred product, process, or analytical test method, or at the selected manufacturing sites. This is another definition. And a successful transfer is a collaborative effort among cross-functional technology teams presenting various site disciplines with communication as a cornerstone to their success. And why conduct technology transfer? Is a systematic approach for knowledge transfer, and it has very definite responsibilities and to ensure process and method validation also. This is done sometimes, And this is also necessitated by some of the GMP drivers. And there are also business considerations like speed to market, lower cost, improved customer service, or compliance obligations. And it occurs multiple times during the life cycle of a drug as it progresses from lab to commercial production. At each stage, changes in equipment, methods, and materials may require process optimization or redevelopment, and the new production team will need training. And changes in materials or scale can result in process variability, and critical process parameters may need to be optimized, or the entire process may need to be redeveloped. And when it is done at most at all transitional and pivotal stages as given in the figures here. And there are different types of technology transfers. An emerging technology transfer, which is an innovative technology that currently is undergoing bench scale testing, in which a small version of the technology is tested in a laboratory. And innovative technology is a technology that has been field tested and applied to a hazardous waste problem at site, bulk, lack a long history of a full-scale use, and also established technology, which is technology for which the cost and performance information is readily available only after technology has been used at many different sites. And it also has different types classification as product technology transfer, which has different considerations like business consideration, shipping, material availability, regulatory and strategic facility considerations, and also process and method technology transfer, which is necessitated by the specific tests or process test needs, specifications, process method development and validation, and process related facility considerations. And these are some of the types, like a bilateral technology transfer, where the technology owner, who is inventor or developer or owner of rights and know-how, directly transfers it to a recipient. There is also a technology transfer platform where consultants, organization, experts come together and form a platform and then use that platform to transfer the technology to manufacturers. It's a bifunctional, bidirectional process. And also a technology transfer hub, like the current mRNA hub, where you have a pool of know-how owners, technical assistants, advisors, developers, and also manufacturers who again use it as a hub to transfer it to new manufacturers at different locations. So what are the steps involved? It's a technology acquisition, and it has technology absorption phase, it has a technology adaptation phase, and then technology improvement phase. And then it is involving 6 P's, as you can see here, which is a proper research, paperwork, pricing, publicity, partnership, and people's acceptance. And it has been defined as shown in this slide. Proper research means it's a proper research means that the results are reproducible and issues such as scale up, stability, etc., and other practical know-how has been addressed. Proper work is that there is a proper institutional and guidelines regarding IP protection and licensing modalities are all adhered to properly. Pricing is the most difficult and critical area of tech transfer. A too high transfer price can put off the buyer, leaving the technology unsold. Publicity is important to identify and then approach buyer, example, to adapt targeted publicity and not blanket publicity. Partnership, this means working along with industry. Industry takes it up, manufacturer, and makes it available to the society. People's acceptance, it is no use trying to develop a technology which people will not accept it. That is due to the religious reason, social concern, or genetically modified food, an example like that. What are the elements? A technology transfer has elements on equipment side. It has quality and regulatory considerations. It has raw materials and consumables, and all affecting the process and analytical methods employed. And then if you see the figure on the left, a technology transfer happens between a process development lab to a process development lab across companies. A tech transfer, process development to manufacturing across buildings or across sites. And tech transfer, manufacturing to process development lab across buildings, across sites. This is to improve or modify a process which is already established at that stage. And then also tech transfer between PT to manufacturing across buildings and across sites, again during the later stages of process validation and characterization, and at different stages of the product life cycle. As shown in the figure in the right, it involves scale up at different levels, and at different stages you have either identification of critical unit operations and parameters is done, and then followed by process definition and studies and critical unit operations parameters definition between phase 1 and phase 2 during process scale up, process validation studies during a phase 2 to phase 3 process scale up, and then manufacturing and product launch. And at each stage there will be physicochemical characterization to demonstrate product comparability as indications of process scalability. And this is a framework where different stakeholders and different aspects of tech transfer are involved, like project management, knowledge codification, centralized governance, organization structure, which I'll be dealing with in the subsequent slides. The hierarchy is like this, as shown in this figure. It has a corporate business vision, which has sourcing strategy plus manufacturing strategy, followed by a comprehensive tech transfer strategy, and also site transfer plans. And there are going to be 2 different levels of tech transfer. One is at program level, and one is at project level. And the technology transfer is defined by a proper governance structure, which is technology transfer and development and transfer teams, technology transfer agreement. It should be also having a quality agreement, quality policy in place, site-specific SOPs, and the team will involve a steering committee, technology transfer team leader, team members, sub-team leaders, sub-teams, and sub-team members, which I'll be explaining again in the subsequent slides. This all comprises the project governance and administrative roles and responsibilities. And these are the skills needed for technology transfer, like product development, business development, negotiation skills, intellectual property, market evaluation, networking, communication, and scientific knowledge. And the teams will involve people from different functions of manufacturing and analytical setup, like team leader, transferring site development, receiving site manufacturing, development operations, quality, engineering, regulatory affairs, materials, logistics, and as others as appropriate, depending on the technology and the process which is transferred. And then the roles of different team members are like this: site management as approves and plans and reports, assigns sites resources and establish priorities. Steering committee has an appropriate technical management function from originating to receiving sites, appoint the team leader and defines the scope of work, ensure compliance with quality and tech transfer agreements, approve plans and reports. And the team leader is responsible for construction, maintenance of overall TT plan and primary liaison for all the project management. And TT team has to organize and execute the plan, compile the report, ensure all required documentation is in place, and appoint sub-teams as required. And originating and receiving facilities have their own functions as listed here, like analytical expertise of receiving sites, process expertise, documentation, provision of standards, controls, perform gap analysis, etc. So, technology transfer functional team has critical drivers like originating and receiving responsibilities defined and agreed upon front, like key stakeholder participation, who does what, excellent management interfaces, and also to issue metrics to track TT progress, like on-time milestone tracking, percentage of documents transferred generated, percentage training complete, and percentage gap score as the project and tech transfer moves along. And the gap analysis is first done to identify the gaps between originating and receiving sites, the process method gaps, information gaps, facility gaps, and this leads to a work packages definition. And then work packages will comprise accountability tables and action items and task lists. So the TT plan will have integrated action items from gap analysis project timeline. It has direct completion of work packages from gap analysis and integrates validation plans with technology transfer. And these are the different elements of a plan, like overview, technical descriptions, experimental outline, validation approach, success criteria, different stage gates, and then training requirements and milestone deliverables. And then the TT structure overall implements the plan as such. And the execution goes through different phases, like a learning phase, a demonstration phase, and a validation phase. And it has different stage gates like success criteria and deliverables. The phase one involves planning and learning the knowledge capture, that is training of SMEs at originating site, integration with originating and receiving site schedules, transfer of technical documentation to receiving site is also done through demonstration at the originating site. And the phase two involves a demonstration batch phase, where the transfer of execution at scale at receiving site and demonstration is done by the people from the originating site with the observation from the receiving site people, and then demonstration of robust process method at receiving site. And then the phase three will involve a validation batch phase and validation of process at receiving site and production of commercial material. And the gates are defined by the TT plan. And these phases might vary depending or might have minor adjustments depending on the kind of technology and the stage of technology transfer. This is generally the technology transfer flow. I'm not going to get into detail, but then the main thing is you have a technology transfer protocol version 1, which will be made after final development studies. And then once the basic facility fit is done and order raw materials is done, then the process confirmation and TTP version 1 is made. And the full facility fit and confirm raw material and generate batch records is done after that. And this is the process flow documentation and the approximate timeline for weeks and months for different stages of the tech transfer. I'm not going to get into detail of this. And then the information flow is managed from the originating site and receiving site to preserve the integrity of the technical information during the tech transfer phases as given in this slide. During using different methods of registration and process, communication dispensation. Outcomes and deliverables again are technology transfer packages and technology transfer report. So there should be a clear bottom line financial focus. These are the success factors. active senior management leadership, disciplined approach, sequenced and linked tools, rapid project completion, clear definition of success, supporting infrastructure, and creation and use of process understanding, use of data and statistical modeling. And there are do's and don'ts for the technical teams to follow to make sure that the tech transfer process goes on smoothly. And there are main challenges in priority in terms of recipients' perspective, like vaccine manufacturing. 70% of the developing countries face inadequate R&D capacity, lack of experience in R&D staff, like etc. And mailing challenges in an order of priority from providers' perspective or the R&D ability and budget to support technology transfer, business case, clinical trial expertise, and etc. And there are specific GMP drivers given in different technical documentation and guidelines as given in these slides in 21 CFR and also in Hydrolax volumes 4 chapter 7 and also WHO technical report series number 961 to 2011 annex 7. ICH Q10 pharmaceutical quality system also gives a life cycle management of the technology transfer and also the product life cycle. So in summary, TT developing countries has contributed significantly to increase vaccine supply, but establishing local vaccine manufacturing is not necessarily cost effective. This should be carefully considered. Changing dynamics has to be carefully considered, and biggest barrier to vaccine tech transfer is lack of R&D capacity in developing countries. And for TT to be successful and attractive, a win-win condition is required for both the receiver and the technology giver. So what are the way forward? A country with manufacturing capacities built upward should have appropriate technical skills, QMS, market, and political commitment. And they should use advocacy to increase investment, generate long-term research interest. There should be strong collaboration of technology partners and local research institutions, and setting up of regional manufacturing to cater to a number of local countries as we are striving to do now, and long-term financial planning, financing from national governments, venture capitalists, and others, key partnerships, minimizing inadequate funding and misuse of funds, and then also government commitment, policy supporting capital access, and continuous sponsorship of an independent NRI to ensure long-term viability of manufacturers. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I am ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi, for presenting the process of tech transfer, which is a critical aspect of the capability for vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And with this, we now move on to the second presentation, which will be delivered by Dr. Tarun Saluja, a clinical research scientist at IVI. And he will be speaking on clinical research in resource-limited settings. Tarun, over to you.
Thank you, Birknet. So very quickly, I will take you through clinical research in resource-limiting settings. As we know, low and middle income countries represent majority of the world population and accounts for most of the preventable infectious diseases. Therefore, to guide decisions about most efficient and cost-effective intervention, healthcare system needs evidence. And it becomes more important if the resources are scarce, because there is a need to prioritize few interventions over the others. And when it comes to the clinical trials, as per one of the leading clinical trial registry, 80% of the trial listed are from the developed countries, and developing countries are underrepresented. When it comes to evidence generation, there may be a need to do clinical trials for drugs, diagnostic, vaccine, or biological products. But at the same time, evidence generated from one country may not be applicable to others, because of the diversity in disease burden, genetic structure, and other population dynamics. As such, clinical trials are complicated, time-consuming, and costly. And when it comes to low-income setting and the scarcity of the resources, this further adds to the complexity. Therefore, identifying barriers and designing context-appropriate strategies are the critical for the success of the clinical research. So this slide is highlighting few of the potential barriers, to name few: lack of financial and human capacity, ethical and regulatory system obstacles. Either regulation do not exist in the country, or even if it exists, are overcomplicated in many countries, which discourages researchers, manufacturers from coming forward for research activities in the country. Another barrier is lack of research environment in terms of infrastructure, research, material, guidance, lack of confidence, and scientific environment. And there is a country where there are countries where there is suspicion toward the clinical research in societies. When it comes to operational barrier, unsupportive administrative system can lead to the difficulties in subject recruitment and logistic challenges and management, like difficulties in maintaining cold chains and transportation, etc. Another barrier could be competing demands, that is lack of time and other competing priorities. So now, how to overcome all these barriers? Answer is capacity building, which is in terms of training and infrastructure. So one of the mission of IVI is to build capacity in low and middle income countries. And under this mission, many efforts are going on in Asia and Africa. So this picture is from one of the published effort in which huge task of capacity building was successfully achieved. Very quickly, to give you a snapshot of the efforts, it started with the central training. The purpose of the central training was to give basic knowledge of clinical trial to site investigators, study coordinator from each site, government official, regulator, ethical bodies. And when it comes to the site-specific training, the purpose was to give operational aspect of the clinical trials in addition to the basic training. This was clubbed with many mock drills and dry runs. The purpose was to simulate real situation of the trial as per study protocol, operation manual, and site-specific procedures. There is a famous saying in medicine cannot be learned without going to the clinical wards. So in the same concept, what we did was we sent a naive team from the naive site to the highly experienced, well-established site. The purpose was to get them some real experience of know-how and come back to their own naive sites and replicate the same. And to help in all these efforts, many contract services organizations helped us. Local coordinator, consultant were hired to facilitate the process. And of course, there was huge engagement for the stakeholders as well. So as I mentioned, the capacity building in terms of training and infrastructure. So this is a picture from a low income country having capacity built for a clinical trial. Top left is for the informed consent room, down left is for the IP storage, and top right is the post vaccination observation room having all the facilities for emergency tackling. And down right is the data entry. So when it's come to community engagement, equally important is to come up with a well-defined community engagement and communication plan at all levels, like at national level, engaging national regulators, national media, at the local site level, engaging site institutional review board, local authorities, and local media. And most importantly is the target community from where the trials subject or trial participants are coming in. There should be representation from community leaders, representative, local immunization officer, local healthcare providers. So this, if there is a well-defined plan, it always pays well and it facilitates the clinical trial execution at the site. So to summarize, it's a very well documented fact that strengthening research capacity in developing countries is one of the most effective and sustainable way of advancing health and development in these countries. It helps the local government policymakers to take informed decisions. There is a huge untapped potential for research in this country with availability of young pools of medical and paramedical personnel, and they all are eager to learn, adapt. What they need is a chance. So now the question is how to develop the capacity. There are many models, there are many ways. One of the successful model is the product development partnership. Let me give you two examples. International Vaccine Institute collaborated with funders, various countries, regulators, sites for developing a oral cholera vaccine. So this is a very successful model, and the cholera vaccine is already licensed, WHO pre-qualified, and is stockpiled by WHO. Similar efforts are going on for typhoid conjugate vaccine and COVID-19 vaccine as well. Another successful example is from the PATH. The PATH collaborated with various stakeholders for the Rotavirus Vaccine development program. So which highlights the importance of PDPs in setting up and executing clinical trials in resource limiting settings. So in a nutshell, the message is there is an urgent need to build the capacity in underdeveloped countries. With this, I conclude my slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tarun, for a very informative presentation outlining the different aspects of clinical trial conduct in resource-limited settings, and for sharing your valuable experience in Nepal, and also for finishing on time or in time. Thank you. We'll have a third presentation from Ms. Delesemi Darko, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Food and Drugs Authority in Ghana. And she will be presenting on the importance of securing WHO classification of national regulatory authorities as functional NRS. And Ms. Darko will join us online from Ghana. Over to you, please.
I'm having a bit of a problem. Interestingly, I'm in Cairo and I'm having a bit of a problem sharing my screen.
Okay. Maybe we can go to the next presentation, maybe, and then we can.
While I sort this out. Yes. Yes, please. While I sort this out. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we will now have the next presentation by Dr. Abbas. And his presentation will be, he's an assistant professor of disease modeling from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and he'll be presenting on vaccine epidemiology and economics, and he actually joins me here in the room, so over to you.
Thank you, Berkne, and thank you to all the colleagues out here. It's my pleasure to present to all of you on vaccine epidemiology and economics, primarily from an equity perspective. And okay, is the sound good now? Okay, great, excellent. So just to recap again, it's my pleasure to present to all of you on vaccine epidemiology and economics from an equity perspective. Okay, great. So let me introduce and start off with a recent study that we conducted, wherein we looked at the impact of vaccination in 98 low and middle income countries against 10 pathogens. And here, primarily, the pathogens are focused on for the vaccines given in the first year of life, such as hepatitis B, hemophilia type B, Japanese encephalitis, measles, meningococcal, pneumococcal, rotavirus, rubella, and yellow fever, and the HPV vaccine, which is given to adolescent girls. And the coverage has been improving from 2000 and from 2010 and then 2019 as well for all of these vaccines over this time period, which is actually a very good sign. And what is the impact of this? Is that what we see on the red bar or the red line is without vaccination, what would have been the impact? And what we see with respect to the blue line is the impact because of the vaccines that have been given from 2000 to 2019, and then also the projections based from 2020 to 2030. So we see an impact on reduction with respect to cases averted, deaths averted, and as well as healthy life years gained by vaccination for all of these vaccines, except for HPV. And because for the HPV vaccine impact, to see the reduction in cervical cancer burden will take a decade or more before we see the reduction in burden. But it's still a very good investment to give and provide these HPV vaccines today to adolescent girls to prevent cervical cancer later in their lifetime. And how much has been the impact across is, since 2000, around 37 million children have been saved by these vaccines in 98 low and middle income countries, and another 32 million lives can be saved by 2030. And especially the primary beneficiary of vaccines, because of the corresponding demography and corresponding underlying burden of disease as it stands today, is the African region. And adding on to those 10 vaccines, adding another 4 more vaccines as well, which are in the first year of life, which is the BCG vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. And here we are looking at the impact at the very global level. What we can see is that the vaccines can avert as many as 51 million deaths during this upcoming decade of 2021 to 2030. That's quite remarkable. And once again, as we can see, the region that will stand to gain by providing these vaccines in the coming decade is again primarily in the African region. Again, because of the underlying demography of very young population and a growing population, as well as the underlying burden of disease is relatively higher in this region. So this region stands to gain the most by providing these vaccines in this region. With respect to the return on investment, we stand to gain around $21 for every $1 invested, primarily looking from a much more narrower perspective from the health sector perspective and the cost of illness approach. When you adopt a much more broader socioeconomic perspective where we use the value of statistical life approach, we estimate roughly around $54 for every $1 invested in providing these vaccines. Again, for the next upcoming decade, like with 2020 and 2030, we potentially estimate a return of around $0.8 trillion, which is a very positive return on investment. And as part of the WHO endorsed Immunization Agenda 2030, coverage and equity is a prime strategic priority along with other key priorities of the immunization agenda as well. And with respect to coverage and equity, here we look at examples with respect to 3 different countries. With respect to Nigeria, Ethiopia, and as well as Kenya, what we see is that there are disparities at the subnational level, and especially with respect to 2 areas that do have difficulties in reaching higher levels of vaccination coverage are primarily remote rural areas and urban slums as well. And in addition to that, there are other socioeconomic disparities that also come into play. So not only we need to improve the coverage at the national level, we also need to improve the coverage in an equitable and sustainable manner as well. So there are things that we can look into across not only at the national level, but also the subnational and at local levels as well. How do we go about it? How can we improve coverage and equity? With respect to existing vaccines, some of the methods that we could try is, some of the interventions that we could try is existing interventions that we can try is, one is with respect to immunization service integration with other services that are delivered in primary healthcare centers. And here is an example where in 2 counties of South Sudan, where we have shown that by integrating immunization services with pediatric programs, with nutrition programs in primary healthcare centers, here we can see with respect to the pneumococcal vaccine, the drop-off rates have reduced and the uptake rates for the first dose, second dose, and the third dose have all increased in both the counties as well. So this is a kind of a successful summary of how we can actually do it with the existing tools and that we can improve and scale up the coverage of existing vaccines. Other ways to do it to improve through vaccine timeliness and confidence so that the demand side is also kept up. So it's not only just generating the supply, but there's also demand side from the community and from the parents to get those vaccines on time. And last but not the least, wider adoption of electronic immunization registries will help us to have real-time analytics on the trends, uptake and trends, and also to identify any gaps that we need to fill in so that we can implement the programs much more closely to address the gaps and needs rather than conduct annual surveys or even surveys every few years, wherein there's a much more lag time wherein we can implement the newer interventions. With respect to new vaccines, how do we go about it? We have to basically engage the stakeholders right through the whole cycle, right from the initial assessment, communication, and decision making, so that we can make decisions on which vaccines to develop and how to go about developing it. So kind of looking at the whole continuum, right from the discovery, development, and delivery of vaccines by engaging stakeholders so that once a vaccine is delivered, we have the whole pathway in place rather than kind of running into certain hurdles, right, from discovery to much more like broader adoption, like clinical trials, and then on to regulation, and then also to sustainable delivery on a long term. So this is the kind of the newer framework that we basically want to use with respect to the new vaccines. So that once we do decide which vaccines to target, we go about the whole pipeline, well thought out and well planned out right from the very start, rather than running into these hurdles as we go through the discovery, development, and delivery phases of new vaccines. So what about during the recent COVID pandemic? there has been major disruptions in routine immunization programs and also suspension of many vaccination campaigns. In fact, a lot of, still to date, quite a good number of campaigns which has been suspended since March 2020 has not restarted, especially in many countries in Africa. And again, here we have shown, even during the COVID pandemic, even at the peak of the pandemic, it's best and it's highly beneficial to continue the routine immunization programs. So they should be safeguarded and they should be continued, irrespective of the threat that we have from the COVID pandemic disruptions, is still highly beneficial. And here we also have a kids version of the same analysis, which is available both in English and French as well. So please share it with the community, with your children, with school teachers in your community as well. So in summary, the take-home message is vaccines are a good technology and good use of financial resources that leads to improved population health, which in turn leads to better human capital, better cognitive outcomes, which in turn leads to better productivity and economic well-being. So it's not just a one-way flow of resources from finance to health, it's actually a positive reinforcing feedback wherein it will actually lead to much better societal capital, human capital, and economic well-being as well. And these are the corresponding references for today's talk, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaja, for the nice presentation on vaccine impact on global public health and how it impacts the overall achievements in economic aspects and also other aspects. Yeah, so with this, we go to Dr. Darko's presentation, and hopefully this time the technical issues have been fixed. Can we move ahead? All right, I think we can take some more time fixing the technical issues, and we can for now move to the second session of the symposium, which will be moderated by Dr. Avmi G, and it will be a panel discussion, and Dr. Avmi G will take over from here. Dr. Avmi G is a Chief Executive Officer at the Institute Pasteur Korea, and over to you.
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So it gives me great pleasure to moderate this panel discussion on a business model for sustainability. We had a great session, 1 presentations on the process and challenges of vaccine R&D, manufacturing and licensure. Now in this panel session, we have 4 distinguished panelists, Dr. Duncan Steele and Dr. Narkon Premturi and Professor Ines Bijin and Mr. Patrick Tipu. Each speaker will talk about 5 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. So our first speaker is Dr. Duncan Steele. Dr. Steele is Deputy Director of Global Health and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So please welcome Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Dr. G. I'm actually the Deputy Director of the Enteric and Diarrheal Diseases team at the Global Health Division at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. First, I would like to congratulate Dr. Kang Ho and Dr. Jerome Kim for arranging this meeting, but also for the amazing efforts that the Republic of Korea has made in terms of the vaccine workforce training hub. It was interesting to hear that the first workforce training will be done with over 350 participants a little later this year. So congratulations for these efforts. I also wanted to recognize the role of the African CDC, and I'm sorry that Dr. Ndembi has not been able to join us today because of their leadership on the continent with surveillance and disease monitoring, as well as their initiative with this. I think in terms of some opening comments for this panel discussion, I do think that we're facing amazing challenges for this. The business model is going to require a significant commitment. It's going to require a long-term commitment from multiple stakeholders, not least of which are the governments of the African continent in coming together and in supporting each other in this whole initiative. I think we also recognize that the international community will have a role to play, as they have already, but in the years ahead. The various manufacturers on the African continent have, frankly, a steep road, I think, ahead of them because of the manufacturing capabilities that exist on the continent and the need to upgrade these, including building new facilities. I have seen figures that indicate to build a new manufacturing facility is literally in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is a significant commitment that will be needed by governments on the continent, by the international community, and by those manufacturers themselves. We also know that there's going to be incredible efforts required on harmonizing the regulatory processes and authorities on the continent. And again, I'm sorry that Dr. Daku has had some problems in connecting, because I think that presentation would be enlightening for the discussion that is to come. Finally, I think that there are going to be regional challenges in terms of both the choices of vaccine for the manufacturers to make and how they make those choices and how they make them in terms of a regional market rather than individual national markets. It is going to be significantly challenging to make sure that we have a sustainable finance model that can utilize regional diseases and regional interventions and solutions. Dr. Kangho mentioned the African proverb about if we want to go far, we need to go together. And I do think that it's just unbelievably true at this time in the history of Africa, where we have the highest population growth globally is occurring in Africa. We have increasing pathogens of epidemic potential, not only SARS-CoV-2, but we've seen Ebola, we've seen yellow fever, we've seen cholera. And a lot of this is due to, I think, changing climate and to the increased urbanization that we're seeing globally, but on the continent in particular. And so I think this is the opportunity where we need to come together as an African community. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, where we can collectively look and see what is best for the continent, be realistic in our aspirations about vaccine manufacturing, and come together to make sure that we can generate African solutions for some of the African problems that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Still, for sharing your great insight on this subject. And now I will move on to the next speaker, Dr. Nakhon Premsri. Dr. Premsri is the director of the National Vaccine Institute in Thailand. So please welcome Dr. Premsri.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Yang Mi. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Yes. Again, the slide is sure it's clear. Okay.
Yes,
thanks to IVI and the organizer for inviting me to this discussion. I'm presenting on the business model of sustainability that aiming for the national vaccine security. And as I just to brief on the role and function of the National Vaccine Institute of Thailand. It's a government agency, and it was established as an autonomous authority. Actually, it was firstly as a public organization, but now it's a public authority. And the objective of the NVI is to make, number one is national strategic policy and plan. And number 2 is to promote, support the R&D and manufacturing activity, aiming for the high quality of vaccine in sufficient quantities to be used in both normal and emergency situations. And number 3 is to manage and operate and integrate the national strategic and action plan for national vaccine security. 4, 5, 6 is a kind of supporting role on the vaccine network and information center and human resource capacity development. So those are the function of NVI. And my discussion will kind of on the effort on vaccine development for developing country according to the vaccine development cycle. At the lower part, just to mention on the contribution between government sectors and private sectors, that the magnitude of the contribution is kind of declining, or the kind of lower on the investment from the governmental sector when the activity go further, but the private sector will be involved more and more in an escalating manner from R&D to the manufacturing. So this a kind of experience that we have done so far with our partner, and NVI is working with the partner in the field of R&D, non-clinical trial, and pilot scale production, clinical trial production, manufacturing, registration, and post-marketing surveillance. Just for an example of the COVID-19 pandemic that we developed our candidate vaccine within our country, we have more than 20 candidates, so from the discovery and animal testing. And right now we have 4 candidate vaccine being tested in human for phase 1 and phase 2. And so far the safety and immunogenicity data is quite comparable to the licensed vaccine. So this has to be our continuing effort to build up our own vaccine development within our country. And for the non-clinical study, we take the opportunity during COVID-19 to improve animal facility for even the small animal like rodents, and also the non-human primate center. So we have been working with our partner in university, Mahidol University, Naresuan University, and Chulalongkorn University to build up the capacity on the animal testing. And right now, those facilities has been passed through the AAA standard, and some has been passed off OECD GRP, and some being certified with OECD GRP. And for the pilot scale production, we built up the capacity at the National Biopharmaceutical Facility, which is located in King Mongkut University Technology at Thonburi, or KMUT, KMUTT, and became the first state-owned contract manufacturing facility for production of clinical research, GMP biopharmaceutical. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, NBF has been strengthened to be a pilot plant of COVID-19 vaccine with the platform of nucleic acid-based subunit protein and viral vector. And as a CDMO service, they can conduct a process development of bioprocessing engineering, pharmaceutical science, and regulatory science, so that the capacity that we work with our partner within our country to build up the capacity. And for the clinical trial, we have a group of researchers to conduct the clinical trial within our country. And as you know that Thailand has experience with the HIV vaccine clinical trial of RV144 in 2003 onward to 2010. And then that experience has been built our clinical research over here in Thailand. For the production scale, we have a technology transfer collaboration with AstraZeneca to produce chatdogs for AstraZeneca viral vector vaccine supply for Southeast Asian in a capacity of over 200 million doses per year. And then with the local collaboration with Siam Science as a CDMO. So it's focused on the manufacturing of biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical medical device and related healthcare products. And with that, facility can be switched or turned to be COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing. And the other facility as a fill and finish capacity over here, we also have a company that is kind of state-owned as a government pharmaceutical organization, and the joint venture between GPO and Sanofi Pasteur as GPO and BP, which is a type private sector that can conduct a fill and finish activities for both of freeze-dried product and liquid product in a number of millions of doses per year. So those are the kind of building up the capacity of collaboration, aiming for the vaccine security, meaning that we establish what we call the self-reliance vaccine capacity. So establishing of the successful partnership for vaccine access in the country requires the cooperation of various stakeholders with the mutual benefit among the parties. And it is critical to have a strong partnership among the network. And one more important is the collaboration of strengthening vaccines capacity needs a strong and continuing of policy support. So NVI as a government agency, we are the connecting point from the policymaker to the operator within our country, and as well as we are looking forward to work with our local partner and international partner like a World Health Organization, UNICEF, CEPI, and IVI. And we will match a proper partner with our local partner on vaccine R&D and strengthen on local manufacturing. So, and then we will connect them to the local authority to support those activities within our country. So just to share our experience during COVID-19 for kind of country capacity building in an example of developing country that would like to be on the kind of self-reliance of vaccine. So thank you very much. I will stop over here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Premsri, for sharing your own experience of national vaccine security in Thailand, which will be very helpful for securing vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa region. So now I will introduce next speaker, Professor Anes Bijin. She is the Executive Director of WHO Academy. So please welcome Dr. Anes Bijin.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important symposium, and thanks to IVI and the Egyptian agency for this invitation to the WHO Academy. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see it right now?
Yes.
Do you see do you see the slides?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, so next slide, please, not the title, the next slide, if possible, because I don't have the hand on the showing the slide, I'm so sorry.
So can IVI people move the slide forward, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. I'm very sorry. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the inequity in access to vaccine and in essential health products in general between countries. This is a slide showing that only 18% of low-income countries had access to vaccine as compared to 72% for high-income countries. So those persistent inequity in access to vaccines really shows why the world needs more widespread, regionally based vaccine production. And not only now, but also for the future. Next slide, please. Next slide, if possible. Can you change the slide? Thank you. So just to show you that in this context, many vaccine production initiatives were launched or announced in low and middle income countries last year, including on the African continent. Next slide, please. Can you change the slide? Next slide. I don't see how, yeah. Okay, thank you. So WHO and the Medicine Patent Pool announced earlier this year the names of 15 manufacturers that will receive support from the mRNA technology transfer program. And in those countries, there are 6 African countries which have been selected to participate in this program: Egypt, Tunisia, Senegal, Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. Next slide, please. So, however, one of the biggest challenges we face is increasing the supply of skilled workforce with training in biomanufacturing. And this is not just about COVID-19 or not only about vaccines. We need to train workforce in biomanufacturing in the broader sense, including for other health products like monoclonal antibodies or insulin. As you know, biological products are manufactured through a complex cycle. Equipments and processes are evolving very quickly, and training should target very specific skills while at the same time empowering the workforce with multiple competencies. Currently, the existing training offers are primarily in industrialized countries. It is at high cost and mostly in person and in English. This makes training not accessible to enough trainings in low and middle income countries. That's why WHO is committed with its WHO Academy to support this workforce development needs with the establishment of a biomanufacturing training hub initiative. Next slide, please. WHO welcomes all the recently announced initiatives to increase local production. We will support them by ensuring access to training available through a comprehensive curriculum and adapted to the different profiles of the learners. This support will be offered through the biomanufacturing training hubs and the WHO Academy. And in parallel, we are also intensifying regulatory strengthening to ensure compliance with international standards. Additional training will also be offered to all regulatory bodies. Next slide, please. So in that matter, WHO has identified partners willing to establish a global biomanufacturing training hub. This initiative will aim to reach 4 objectives. First, to upskill technicians, engineers, and managers through didactic hands-on training and placement in the industry. Second, to support WHO technology transfer program. Third, to facilitate knowledge sharing between manufacturers and establish a global network of training initiatives. And finally, to ensure inclusiveness and gender equality in science and biomanufacturing. The Ministry of Health and Welfare from the Republic, I'm sorry, there is one slide missing. I'm afraid we went too fast. So never mind. The Ministry of Health and Welfare from Republic of Korea has been selected to become the global hub. They will host the first introductory course operated by IVI next month for 100 trainings from low and middle income countries. Another training on good practices will be also offered in October. Additional partners and regional centers are currently being identified to ultimately create a training network. This network will build on existing initiatives from biomanufacturers and universities to ensure a comprehensive training offer that meets the global needs. The different hubs will be completed by online trainings developed by the WHO Academy in accordance to our standard. We are, as you know, the WHO Academy, we are the lifelong learning division in WHO. We are setting up for the first time in the organization standards for training. This will enable WHO to offer credentials that formally recognize learning activities. And the Academy will also ensure the latest technology and learning innovations that are used to the greatest possible extent to maximize coverage and impact. And of course, we will ensure multilingualism to the trainings. Next slide. For now, the Global Biomanufacturing Initiative is at the setup phase. We are currently working on establishing the governance and securing the fundings while analyzing the training needs in priority countries. The training offer will gradually expand to ensure global reach. We are convinced that collaboration with biomanufacturing experts and partners involved in this sector will be key for success and we welcome interested parties to contact us. The pandemic reminded us that such inequalities to access to essential health products cannot keep rising. The world needs to share these vital global health public goods, engage in technology transfer, sharing the know-how, and training. Investing in workforce and workforce development takes time and will require commitments and collaborations between public and private actors on the long term. WHO is committed to support this important effort at the global level, with a special attention to the African continent, where the biomanufacturing capacities are low right now. This will be central to achieve country and regional sovereignty, and we think that this is the ultimate goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Putin, for sharing great overview of WHO Manufacturing Workforce Development Initiative. So now I want to invite our last speaker for the panel discussion session, Mr. Patrick Tipu. So Mr. Tipu is Head of Science and Innovation, BioVac Institute in South Africa. And also Dr. Tipu is founding member of African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. So please welcome Dr. Tipu.
Thank you very much. Just checking that you can hear me clearly.
Very clearly, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some remarks during this panel discussion and participate in this meeting. I would like to echo Duncan's congratulatory remarks and also acknowledge the formidable work of the African CDC's championship and leadership of the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing. As you shared in your introductory remarks, I'm part of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, AVMI. So I'd like to share some brief remarks about AVMI and then zoom out a little bit. So AVMI was established in 2012 as an initiative focused on advocating for building vaccine production capacity on the continent. And our argument from the very beginning was when we look at the vaccine landscape in Africa, there was this over-dependency on supply of vaccines coming from the outside, and specifically from Gavi and UNICEF into the African market. Now, during times when the weather is well and fine and the sun is shining, there was no issue or concern. However, it was our proposition at the time that when the going gets tough, and we've seen that happen with the COVID-19 situation, exactly what was anticipated by many, many players and stakeholders and commentators actually materialized. To our disbelief and disappointment, countries did what they did to look after their own citizens, and we as Africans and other parts of the world were left to fend for ourselves. And this, I think, emphasized the point and confirmed that our argument was a very valid one. And thankfully, through the leadership of the African CDC, we have now a African-wide stakeholder engagement taking place in the form of the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, which has delivered the framework for action, which contains, as Nkezi Ndembi would have probably shared had he participated, 8 bold programs to push this agenda for African vaccine manufacturing forward. And these range from regulatory capacity building to technology transfers to issues around IP and intellectual property, to workforce development, R&D capacity, infrastructure, and market shaping. So one of the other key messages that I'd like to highlight is that the way I like to frame that is building capacity, vaccine capacity, certainly on the African continent. There are 2 sides to the same coin. The one side is building the capacity, and that's rather a technically demanding exercise in terms of facilities, the design of those facilities, workforce development, access to technology, equipment specifications, etc., etc. So it's technical. It's very difficult. It's complex because there are a number of moving parts here, which is all determined by what the product targets are and the technology platforms. But as difficult as it is to build that capacity from a technical undertaking perspective, the more difficult aspect, which is the other side of the coin, is sustaining this capacity, which I think talks to the theme of this meeting. And it's this sustaining of capacity that is really going to be the make or break of what we do and how that gains momentum over the next couple of months and then years into the future. At the heart of this issue is the market. And that's the only way in which one can sustain this, because one has to build it based on business principles. You have to generate revenue that's more than your expenses in order to sustain any operation on the continent. And so the way the market is shaped in Africa, with 60% of UNICEF supplies coming in, supported by Gavi, into Africa, this becomes a real hairy issue to deal with. And I think that, again, I'd like to point out the fact that next week, in actual fact, the African CDC and the PAVM are convening a multi-stakeholder engagement meeting over 3 days in Addis Ababa to deal with this issue of how do we reshape the market and how do we reshape that market to incentivize partnerships for technology transfer so that the investments can take place. And this is investment in time, effort, and money to build this industry in Africa. I've got a lot more that I could share, but in the interest of time, I will hand the floor back to you and be available to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tipu. And so we had the great views and insight from four distinguished panelists. So now I'll move on to the Q&A session. So I will ask four speakers to answer various questions about the business model for sustainability of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So we actually have pre-selected questions, so I will ask those questions to our panelists, as many as possible. So the first question, how shall we address vaccine hesitancy to ensure the uptake of vaccines to be produced in Africa, and any lessons from unused COVID-19 vaccines? So I will ask firstly Mr. Patrick Tipu to answer. So after that, if any other person, any other panelist wants to add, I will very much welcome. So Mr. Tipu first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, this is a key issue, which I think connects with the last point that I made about the market. And in order to sustain our investments that we are making currently across Africa, and as one of the previous presenters showed, that there are a number of investments taking place in many different African countries to build this capacity. I think this whole issue of hesitancy is a very complex issue, and there are multiple facets to it. And so there are many reasons why this hesitancy exists, and they go from one end of the spectrum to the other. So I think that key in all of this is stakeholder engagement, that we need a dialogue to create a productive dialogue with the communities that we are seeking to serve with these vaccines. And this goes beyond COVID. COVID is but I think providing a learning opportunity for us about where the challenges lie. But from a vaccine manufacturing perspective, and given what we've seen unfolding with respect to the availability of vaccines, I think that has complicated the story. And what I mean by that is because of the lag in terms of Africans accessing vaccines, while the rest of the richer countries had far more ready access to vaccines, I think created a dilemma for ourselves. So that's something that I think this whole issue of vaccine equity, building capacity on the African continent and making the vaccines more readily available could solve. Also, I think that for those people who are hesitant because of notions that what is the West or non-African countries or governments trying to do to us as Africans, I think there is a sizable part of the community who believes that. I think local manufacture could ease that tension in terms of saying, well, it's manufactured locally by Africans for Africa. That could also ease the situation a little bit. But I think timely access, so that it's rolled out here when it's rolled out elsewhere, could solve a lot of this. But I don't think that there is a magic wand that one could wave for this to be solved through one simple intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tipu. So, and if there is any other panelist who wants to add on this question, I will invite. Please raise your hand. I Otherwise, I will move to the next question. Okay, so Dr. Steele, do you want to, so I will ask second question to Dr. Steele. So will the business model be applicable to other resource-constrained countries?
Thank you for the question. I think to get to the bottom of that question, we really have to understand what we mean, not only by business model, but by other resource settings. I think we've seen from Dr. Bisnu that there is a significant investment, or efforts rather, right now on the African continent to develop vaccine manufacturing. I think Patrick has spoken very eloquently about the need for that, but also some of the challenges. I do think that for the business model itself to be effective, I can only echo Patrick's comments. It really does have to be very intentional, I believe, and also very sustainable. And without real careful thought and planning around the sustainability model, it is going to be difficult for it to be an effective business model far into the future. And so what do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned, I think we've heard that facilities, new facilities, will cost literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think it's a wasted investment if we were to build facilities and not then have products that would come through those facilities in a timely manner, but also not have a procurement mechanism where the products that are produced are actually needed on the continent and then desired by the ministries of health and other stakeholders for people on the continent. So I think the business model will depend on careful planning, careful choice of products, and then very definitely a long-term sustainable plan and a long-term procurement mechanism where the vaccine supply and demand will be met by the ministries of health. So I think I come back to the idea that we really are going to have a long-term commitment from the ministries of health of the continent, that this is something they will invest in both financially, but also in terms of support for the vaccine manufacturing platforms in different regions or countries. Thank you.
Also in the Q&A session, on the real-time Q&A session, there is one related question regarding the business model. Can we develop a sustainable regional business model instead of having it at the country level? Not all countries have end-to-end capacities, and it might take a long time to build such things at one country level. So if any of you, for example, Mr. Tipo wants to add on this second question, you are very much welcome.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to add to this. I think in support of what Duncan is saying and connecting with the follow-on question about regional capacity versus country capacity, I think that there are very few countries, a handful across the world, that the local market can sustain the industry. So the model going forward needs to be, obviously it's going to be positioned in one or more countries, but it must be at least regional supply and if not continental supply. And I think it's going to be very important which technology platforms they're going to focus on, what flexibility and agility that provides in terms of making products, and which products are going to be focused on. But ultimately, I think that this conversation needs to steer away from COVID because COVID is, in terms of vaccine production going forward, it's yesterday's news. And then the second thing is it needs to expand beyond pandemic vaccines. It needs to focus on routine vaccine production that lays the foundational base so that when we are exposed to another pandemic in the future, we then have a base from which to launch, because this was exactly what had happened in other geographies that had capabilities that they could then repurpose those facilities and resources to make COVID vaccine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next question is going to Dr. Premsri. So what could be strategic direction of vaccine self-reliance for developing country like Thailand? Oh, so, okay, so yeah, after this, I will also invite Professor Putin.
I don't know if Dr. Agnes would like to address the previous question, and I also would like to address the previous question as well. Maybe Dr. Agnes, please, with the WHO.
Yeah, so yeah, I will then first ask Professor Putin for some comments on second question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment on the business model, because it's a very, very important issue, really. And that's the reason why we really, in WHO, want to have a broader approach on biomanufacturing and not only dedicated to vaccine productions. We think that the issue is the long-term sovereignty on biomanufactured products. And really, because we think that right now, if we focus only on vaccine and if we distribute, or if we don't think of regional distribution of biomanufacturing, we might have a lot of duplication and no business model behind, which is very disappointing for countries. So we really want to invest for the long-term biomanufacturing workforce rather than only on tech transfer on vaccines. That was my comment.
Thank you very much, Professor Putin. And then I will now invite Dr. Premsri for your additional comments for the second question and also a third question, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that's two questions is connected. For the sustainability model, I think there is no right or wrong answer between the building up the capacity at the national level or the regional level. But by our experience, we need to have some level of capacity to move forward on the vaccine development. And I think all of the developing countries can choose to have a kind of continuing policy support on this, aiming for the vaccine security. And I think each one need to build up the capacity, especially the human resource, as Dr. Agnes mentioned, which is very important. And if we build up the human resource capacity, we need some field for them to play the role on the research and development. So we cannot just training the people and we don't have the research program within the country. Like the sport man, that you need the match for them to practice and to play in the real world. So the same thing, that you need to build up the capacity like research and discovery or the animal facility at some level. So by that, the strategic direction as Thailand has taken for more than 10 years, that we will build up some of level, what we call the optimum level of the capacity, and then select some of the product to be a kind of flagship that we can maintain our capacity and capability of the people and the facility in the long run, and be prepared, like Dr. Pratik mentioned, that be prepared for the next pandemic, which we don't know yet when it comes, but we need to be prepared. So that strategy that we need to have some level. And then in each country, if they have what we call optimum level, and maybe different in each country, we can join together in the kind of collaboration, like in ASEAN country, like Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and maybe Indonesia, that we can work together, matching our facility within our sub-region or the regional level within our neighboring country to build up the capacity together and join together in the kind of collaboration project. And with the support from developmental partner like the WHO, CEPI, or IVI, or other funding agencies. So this is a kind of approach that we experienced for more than 10 years, and especially for COVID-19 period that we have seen so far. So that's the point that I would like to address for the strategic direction.
Thank you very much, Dr. Premsri. So next question is, are private sectors in Africa ready to invest in vaccine production? Are the government ready to provide right environment? So can I bring this question to Ms. Patrick Tipu, if possible?
Yes, I think that the fact that there are vaccine entities in operation on the continent of Africa, and I can speak specifically and directly to BioVac in South Africa, Afrigen, who's part of the WHO mRNA technology hub, and then Aspen Pharmaceuticals, who has formed a partnership with Johnson & Johnson for the COVID vaccine, is testimony to the fact that the private sector is ready to get involved in this. I think that, a private sector follows a business opportunity, and it comes back to building the business case. So the encouraging thing is that we don't have to start from scratch, because I think we've got centers on the ground across Africa where this is already happening. What we need to do now is ensure that this is expanded, both in terms of other locations, but also where these centers exist, those centers need to scale up and possibly expand their portfolio of vaccines as well. To the point about government intervention and their contribution to creating an enabling environment, I think that this is not a binary situation where it either exists or it doesn't. I think what we experience currently is that this exists along a continuum, that in some jurisdictions, in some countries, that there is more of a readiness or evidence that there's been a creation of an enabling environment. Again, drawing on my own personal experience here in South Africa, the South African government, as a shareholder of BioVac, by the way, did a lot to create an enabling environment for BioVac to navigate some of the slippery slopes and the challenges of building this capacity over the last 20 years. So I think we find a diverse state of readiness across the continent, but essentially this is going to be key. It's unfortunate that only 10 governments in Africa currently have the power to shape the market financially through their own procurement systems. And this again comes back to the key issue which I raised earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tipu. So maybe I'll skip some questions which was originally selected. And maybe I will ask next question of explaining the pros and cons of purified vaccine and whole cultured vaccine in terms of immunogenicity, going to Dr. Premsri. And the next question will be, I will just tell in advance, what practical steps should be taken by various African and international actors to kickstart vaccine manufacturing in Africa? That will go to Dr. Steele. So first, Dr. Premsri, please.
Sorry, may you please repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Okay. So the pros and cons of purified vaccine and whole cultured vaccine in terms of immunogenicity? I think this is very general question.
Pros and cons of what?
The purified vaccine and whole cultured vaccine. So I think I will skip. I think the next question on what practical steps should be taken by various African international actors to kickstart vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So can I invite Dr. Steele first, and then other panelists can add?
Thanks for the question. I think, Dr. Premsi, for the previous question was around, I think, wholesale versus subunit vaccines and what the advantages might be. And it might be worth answering that later. I think you and Patrick could both address that. In terms of the first steps, I think Patrick's probably better placed to answer this question. But what I might say is that I think that we've started the first steps, right? There has been this understanding that Africa needs to have a manufacturing platform, needs to be independent somewhat from importing vaccines from other continents. I think secondly, we do have manufacturing capabilities on the continent, although we recognize that most of that has to be further developed and sustained. I think that the hard work of identifying what the gaps might be and how to address those has also been ongoing over the last year or so, and that might include understanding the capabilities of vaccine manufacturing in Africa, but it also clearly understands the market dynamics that needs to be built. I think we come back to the idea that there would have to be at least regional, if not continental markets that are addressed and that are somewhat solidified in the sense of being able to offer a relatively stable demand of what those vaccine products might be. And again, I come back to Dr. Dorkor. I know we'll get her presentation just now, but I think there's been a general recognition that there needs to be support for the regulatory authorities in different African countries. And I might offer that that's not only the National Regulatory Authority, but also the national control labs and the procurement processes. And all of that needs to be actually developed and sustained and supported. So I'll leave it there and see if Patrick or Dr. Premsi have further thoughts, or Dr. Bisney.
Dr. Premsi, would you like to add some comment?
So please go ahead. I think Dr. Duncan has addressed all, but please, I don't have any additional comment.
Then, if you want to answer my previous question, you can. Well, otherwise, because of time constraint, I will just ask last question to everyone. So you actually covered this issue during your presentations, but what do you think the main issues for the vaccine development in African countries? So I will ask this same question to all four of you. So maybe just 1 minute for each panelist, if you want to just summarize very quickly. So maybe starting with Dr. Steele, and then Dr. Premsi, and then Professor Putin, and Mr. Tipu, please.
Thank you. I think I'll say the biggest challenge is understanding the market dynamics, because that will drive everything else.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Dr. Premsi, if you want to just quickly summarize.
Yeah, I think just for the developing country, I think the policy direction is very important, because starting up of the manufacturing process needs a big investment of the government and a big support from the government at the first stage of the development. But when it has been taking off from the runway, so the private sector can join later on, as I mentioned. And number two, it's about the human resource capacity, as Dr. Agnes mentioned, that human resource is also important, and the facility that we need to build up. So a long-term commitment and the human resource would be very crucial.
Thank you. And now I want to invite Professor Pujin.
Yes, thank you. I think there is not much to add. I think all the panelists strengthened or highlighted the need for a business model and a long-term commitment. And I completely agree with that. I think we need a regional reflection on how to distribute those vaccines, because I don't think that any country in the world can be completely independent on the production of every vaccine we need. And that means that we should share the burden, and we should think globally at the level of the continent or regional level, how to distribute those commitments, who is doing what, how do we share the burden, and how we invest for the long term, not duplicating investments. So I can speak for the WHO Academy, which is my task. I think we need a broad workforce. We need to invest in those workforce, because for the moment, even if we invest in industrial plants, I'm not sure that we can find the workforce to be able to reach the quality and the needs for clinical research, regulatory issues. So that means that we need to think long-term and to organize it from the beginning between African countries, to be sure that we will not be disappointed at the end, trying to invest in many, many countries on many, many vaccines and not being able to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our last panelist, Mr. Tipu, please.
Yeah, I would like to just zoom out a little bit and position the importance of vaccine development as opposed to vaccine manufacture and the adjacency of these two. I think in terms of building capacity in lower middle income countries, I think we've all settled on why that is important. But one way of getting there is through technology transfers. Many of the deals and transactions that we've seen on the African continent has focused on drug product technology transfers, which still creates a dependency on two fronts. One on the technology sharing front, and one on the drug substance front, if you are going to full finished drug product. If you take a step back and you have end-to-end vaccine manufacturing, where you can make drug substance and drug product, you still have a dependency on a technology transfer partner to provide you with that technology and train you up. And this is where vaccine development capacity comes into its own, with the associated costs and risks attached to it, which is a price that I think that we need to sober up and realize that we have to pay if we want this capacity built. And I would argue that it's important for this capacity to be built if we are going to break the cycle of dependency to any great extent over time into the future. I think one of the key shifts that we're going to see happening that will incentivize investments in vaccine development and efforts to build this capacity for local manufacture of clinical trial material is that an industry is being forged at the moment. And one that in the industry begins to flourish, it will provide a pull incentive on the vaccine development side. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for addressing all those questions. So I'm so happy that we are all working together to secure vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa. And Korea is making full efforts as a WHO Center of Global Bio Workforce Training and Manufacturing Hub, especially for African region. And IVI is greatly contributing to these efforts in collaboration with EAPD. From 2021, when we all realized Africa's COVID-19 vaccination rate has been continuously much lower than other regions, we all knew that we need to much strengthen vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa, as low vaccination rates in African region can reflect the low manufacturing capacity. So I also always emphasize the developing countries' vaccine manufacturers network should be fully functional and utilized, and especially expanded in African region. So I do hope Korea's efforts and IVI's great contribution to these efforts could facilitate securing vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa towards the vision of healthy Africa. So with that, I want to thank all panelists for their insightful views on this topic, and also want to thank IVI and EAPD for their great leadership. I thank you. So I will hand over to IVI side.
Thank you, Dr. Yamiji, and the panelists for the great panel discussion. We'll now have Ms. Darko's presentation, which we postponed due to technical issues earlier. And just as a reminder, Ms. Delese Mimi Darko is the Chief Executive Officer at the Food and Drugs Authority in Ghana. And her presentation will be on the importance of securing WHO classification of national regulatory authorities as functional NRAs. Please welcome Ms. Darko.
Thank you very much. So I think my topic has changed a little bit, but I'll still try and talk about it. The topic was actually processes and challenges of vaccine R&D, but I'll still talk about what you just asked me. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'll talk about the legislation for vaccine regulation, the tools and administrative processes, some of the challenges and the way forward. It's actually very interesting listening to all the panel discussions, and I'll try and address some of the questions that were asked during the discussion. Next slide, please. So this is just about the Food and Drugs Authority. We are mandated under parts by a Public Health Act that allows us to monitor the vaccine safety, efficacy, and quality, among other products. So the most important thing for any regulatory authority to ensure that you have the legislation in place, because if you don't have the right legislation, it affects everything that you have to do. The legislation allows you to be able to do things like issue emergency use authorization and also have the right guidances in place for all your processes. Next slide, please. So fortunately for us, we have a good accreditation in place. So we are ISO 9001 accredited for all our processes. We are also fortunate enough to be ISO 17025 2017. And currently we are ISO accredited, our laboratory is ISO accredited for 55 tests. It doesn't include lot release for vaccines, but it includes medicines in the area of microbiology and physical chemical tests for medicines. And we are currently have the largest testing scope in Africa under one roof. In the area of vaccines, we are also WHO benchmarked for medicines and vaccines. We are also a regional center of excellence in medicines registration, in the area of clinical trials, and in the area of pharmacovigilance. What this does for us when we listen to the discussions is that it allows us to support other regulatory authorities. And so what the Food and Drugs Authority does is that we do a lot of capacity building We do a lot of mentorship, and we also do a lot of training with other regulatory authorities. So we've built capacity, and it allows us to do a lot of sharing. So what it does is that we do a lot of harmonization activities with our sister agencies. And it has allowed us to build capacity in ourselves and in also other regulatory authorities. We are also WHO maturity level 3, which we achieved in 2019 during the 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So these are the legislations under which we work in the area of vaccines regulation. So we have the right legislation in place for marketing authorization, for laboratory testing, for safety monitoring, and for clinical trial oversight. And with the right legislation, it enables you to be able to do what you have to do with the right legislation. Next slide. So how do we work? Transparency is actually very key. So we have an interactive website that displays all our guidelines, all our application forms, all the samples that you are supposed to submit, the fee schedules. We have transparent policies. So for example, we have a Reliance policy. There was a discussion that was going on about Reliance. So during the COVID pandemic or during any emergency, we are allowed to rely on the approvals that have been given, say, by the EU. So during a pandemic, if, say, South Africa or the EU or the US FDA has given an approval to a particular product, we have a Reliance policy that would allow us to take the approval that has been given by, say, the WHO, and we can take that approval and also give an approval to a product. So that policy is transparent on our website. We also have a list of registered products. We have everything boldly displayed on the website. And for a developing country, it is very important to have those policies in place so that in times of pandemics, in times of where you need to do some information sharing, you need to be able to use your resources in a more economical or in a more judicious manner. You can use the system of Reliance, so you don't have to go through a full evaluation. You have a Reliance policy in place that allows you to use your resources properly, and then you can rely on somebody else's approval. So it allows you to do that. So we have that policy in place. Next slide, please. So we have two pathways of processing applications. We have the routine pathway, where it is that we'll look at everything that we have to look for. We'll do a full review of our applications. And then, as I mentioned, we have the next pathway, which is where we'll use that pathway for emergencies or products of public health concerns. We have a very systematic way of doing things, where we have committees that look at our reviews. We have an evaluation committee made up of well-trained assessors. We've put a lot of had a lot of training opportunities from WHO, from the EU, we put a lot into training. So we have well-trained assessors. So we have a well-structured evaluation committees made up of first assessors. Then we go through a peer review mechanism. And then after that, we would then go through a registration committee, and we have in place expert advisory committees. And this process is used for both clinical trials and for marketing authorization. And then products are approved. This is the same system. Next slide. This is the same system that we use for clinical trials. So for R&D, we would use the same system. Next slide, please. For the clinical trial process, it is almost the same system. We would go through the same system to authorize clinical trial processes. So a clinical trial certificate a protocol is reviewed. We would use our expert committees. The difference with clinical trials is that we have adopted the AVREF process. Now, this is a regional process whereby if you authorize a clinical trial using a joint review process, if it is a multi-center process, you're doing it in different countries or in a situation where there is a pandemic, for example, or there is an emergency, we are part of the AVREF process. I currently chair the AVREF steering committee. So if there's a clinical trial that's in an emergency should take place, like we did in COVID, in more than one country, there's a process, there's the opportunity to do it in more than one country, and Ghana is part of the 55 countries that take part in the AVREF platform. So you can't use the AVREF process to do a clinical trial. It is faster, it is done in a more timely manner, and a clinical trial can come out within I think we do it in a 10 to 15 day time frame, and the needed medicines, the needed vaccines can be approved for clinical trials in a much faster method. And we did a few of them during COVID. In fact, all the COVID vaccines that were done using the AVREF platform for most of the countries. We also use the same method for joint GCP inspections. We can either use the normal single country method, or we can use the joint AVREF method. We also have in place expert advisory committees for clinical trials, whereby we would use our expert committees to give us advice on the clinical trials that we conduct. We currently have in place clinical trials for emergencies and for pediatric populations. Next slide, please. What are the challenges for vaccine production? That is where I actually want to zone down on at the moment. It was very interesting listening to the discussions, and I would say one of the challenges is that Ghana, and like most African countries, and we heard it, is a vaccine procuring country, and most of us are. And we realized that during the pandemic, if I could take the pandemic, by the time most of the countries of the world had about 80% of vaccines being distributed, Africa had less than 10% of their population being vaccinated, because most of us are vaccine procuring countries. Currently, Ghana, like Rwanda, South Africa, and Senegal, currently are looking at becoming vaccine producing countries. How are we going to do this? Most of us are looking at doing fill and finish facilities for a start. We are looking to do this by coming together and working together. We have decided to do this by our governments are coming together and forming consortiums. Our governments are coming together and working together to develop our human resource capacity. We're looking to come together by doing collaboration and harmonization. So Ghana, for example, is looking to work. Ghana is working with Senegal, Rwanda, and South Africa, and Ghana is going to do the fill finish in a consortium with Senegal and Rwanda. We are doing this by working together, by building capacity together. So it is not going to be an easy task. There's going to be a lot of harmonization. There's going to be a lot of collaboration, but the governments are looking to making this work. Human resource base for vaccine discovery and development is virtually non-existent in Africa at the moment. It is something that has to be developed, and it is something that has to be supported. But the will from the governments is there. The will from the governments looks like it will be sustained. For example, in Ghana, the government has set up what you call the National Vaccine Committee. This is made up of scientists that the government has put together to eventually form the National Vaccine Institute. Next slide, please. This institute has a dedicated group of scientists that will look to support developing, ensuring that there will be, next slide, can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide. I have to go very quickly because, good. So the president has set up the National Vaccine Institute, and it is to ensure the growth of the vaccine manufacturing sector. It is going to be an enabler for research, development of vaccines. Because I had this discussion going on. It is made up of a consortium of researchers from universities and research institutions. It is going to establish partnerships for vaccine manufacture. If the government is not interested in vaccine manufacture, it will not happen. We can do anything that we want, but there needs to be that commitment from government, that commitment to put in funding into areas like R&D, into areas like technology transfer, into areas like regulation. Otherwise, it won't happen. Even into areas like intellectual property. Pfizer, BioNTech, they're going to bring in IP issues. They're going to be IP issues. What is the outlook? I heard someone talking about market shaping. There's going to be offtake mechanism. It is going to be expensive. If government is not interested in putting any funding into this, it's not going to happen. There's very little R&D that goes on in some of our countries. In fact, in most of Africa, there's very little. There's going to have to be the human resource for vaccine discovery. There's very little vaccine discovery going on in Africa at the moment, if anything at all. So government has in all these countries I'm talking about, has agreed to build this capacity. And government has made the effort in Ghana, in Rwanda, in South Africa. South Africa has gone way ahead to put this infrastructure in place to do this. And industries have been set up. In Ghana, one is already underway, and by the third quarter of 2023, I think the fourth quarter, there should be a vaccine fill and finish plant. And by the second quarter of 2024, there should be another vaccine fill and finish plant in Ghana. And I know the same should be coming up for Rwanda, and I think South Africa is way ahead. Senegal is revamping its vaccine manufacturing plants. For the regulatory agency, I know that Ghana is already maturity level 3, and we are soon going to be building up our laboratory to be able to do lot release. We have a vibrant regulatory agency, and we are supporting the other countries to ensure that they can also become maturity level 4 to be able to also release vaccines. The support is there for regulation, but the support should also be there for industry and also for academia. Academia is so important because academia is non-existent in R&D. That is where the fight should be. That is where the support should be. For R&D, regulatory, we are on our way. But for R&D and for manufacturing industry, I think there needs to be a lot more support for us to be able to get where we are supposed to get to. We think it's a pity that NICES was not in. But we think that for Africa, we cannot have one country doing many things. But we think that the support should be in a regional approach. We've been talking about it. Will we have one region being the region for lot release? So one country in one region would be supported to be able to do lot release. One country would be supported to be able to do, be the expert at, R&D. Would one region be able to be supported? We cannot do it every country doing the same thing because it has to be spread around the region. That is the discussion that is going on at the moment. I know there's a gap analysis that is happening to be able to see what can be done in the region. The conversation is still going on, but from the regulatory standpoint, we are getting prepared to support in the area of R&D, in the area of manufacture, and in the area of lot release to support vaccine manufacture. That is what I can say at the moment, but it is still a discussion in progress. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I delayed the whole process. I'm actually in Cairo. That is why my internet was a bit unstable, but thank you very much for having me. And I hope I'll be able to address any questions that you have. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ndarko, for a very insightful presentation on the need for legislation and policy framework for national regulatory authorities, and also for touching on clinical regulatory processes in Africa, the existing challenges, and also, more importantly, the ongoing efforts for regional collaboration to realize vaccine manufacturing capability in the African continent. Thank you. With this, we're nearing the end of our symposium, and we have at last a closing remark from Dr. Heba Wali. Dr. Wali is the chairperson of Vascara and holding company of biological products and vaccines. And Dr. Wali will join us from online from Egypt. Please welcome Dr. Wali.
Before the
Can you please mute?
Hello? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I would like to express my appreciation to speakers and panelists for their valuable contribution to the symposium. Also, my deepest gratitude goes to all who attend the symposium and help to make it such a successful event. I would like to back to the slogan of this symposium, which is securing a healthy Africa with vaccine manufacturing. So we can say healthy Africa as a lesson learned from COVID pandemic, with a low rate of vaccination in Africa due to unavailability of the vaccine doses. So we suffer a lot, all the African countries suffered during the pandemic of the availability of the vaccine doses, which rang the bell that the African countries should work very hard, not only on individual, but also on a manner of grouping or as per the region, to work very close in order to enhance the manufacturing for the vaccine in the African continent. And we find now more than one initiative for vaccine manufacturing. So Africa CDC now, they have an initiative for manufacturing the vaccine about 60% by 2040. As well, now we have the initiative for AMA, which it is an African authority which is going to control the vaccine and all other drugs in the African continent. As the colleague from Senegal, she mentioned that we should work in a group or on a base of the region, that we are gonna to not only manufacturing but also on controlling of the vaccine. So we have already heard a very concentrated speech about the challenges and opportunity for vaccine manufacturing in Africa, and the present potential, guidance, lesson learned, and also the challenge which we are facing nowadays. Back to the symposium and the topics which we highlighted. We can come up with very important pillars in order to enhancing the industry as well the regulator. So we, as highlighted by the talks, that we should look forward to have a very strong research and development, not only for the COVID, but it was for any upcoming pandemic. It is unpredictable. So we should have a very strong R&D. We have to have a strong regulatory authority, strengthen research capacity. As well, the regulatory authority should meet the requirement of WHO, and at least as we have maturity level 3, it's basic, and up to maturity level 4. If we go through the roadmap for the future, what we are looking for and the challenge which is going to face, so we need to talk about the market dynamic. We should have a commitment and policies coming from the country, from the African countries for the vaccine production. Long-term commitment also from all partnership stakeholders working together in the field of vaccine manufacturing, as well WHO and all other agency, which is going to help in capacity building for the vaccine manufacturing, which is gonna by the end to let us at the African countries had a clear roadmap for the industry itself, because as mentioned by Patrick Thibault, all the African countries was depending on having the vaccine from UNICEF. It's ready-made. We don't have any manufacturing facility unless we had in South Africa, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Senegal. We are starting their business and having a vaccine manufacturing facility. So we should work very hard for enhancing to have not only the manufacturing facility, because it is without the know-how, without the R&D, strong R&D, without commitment from the stakeholders in the country itself. So it's coming from the government from each country that they have the intention to enhance the industry for the vaccine manufacturing process. I think by the end of this symposium, we can say that it is the kickoff of the vaccine manufacturing. It is the starting point not only for a producer, but also for the regulatory authority to go and help to be beside the manufacturing. It's also very important that all the regulatory authority should work very hard to issue the guideline for the vaccine lot release, for the GMB, to have their own national guideline to enhance the industry. So I think this initiative coming from IVI at a training for messenger RNA vaccine, so it will be one of the very important points to enhance the production of the vaccine, which is gonna to depend on messenger RNA. And it was announced that 6 countries in African countries now they are gonna to have the support from WHO for the production of messenger RNA vaccine, not only for COVID, but as you know, for the technology for messenger RNA, it will be used for many different types of the vaccine. And also it goes to help the African countries, for example, for the malaria and AIDS also, maybe they can use such kind of vaccine. Finally, self-sufficiency in the production of the vaccine face considerable challenges. So we should work all together. We should have a consortium in Africa to define. Not all the African countries can able to produce all different kind of vaccines. So as you know, we had 10 pathogens. We are producing the vaccine to cover such 10 pathogens. So no individual country can able to produce all 5 of the vaccine. So also we should work on market shaping and how we are gonna to put a policy for that. So we should have a policy for the production of the vaccines in the African continent and trying to check what we have, the infrastructure with each country, what is the success element can help such industry. And finally, I feel along with many others that this meeting is very useful and it should continue supporting the industry for the vaccine production in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wali. And I would like to thank all the presenters and the panelists and also everyone who joined us today, who joined us online today. And with this, we close today's symposium and goodbye.
Goodbye.